Hi everybody and welcome to today's ISE webinar. Sorry for the slight delay. Platform glitches that we still get from time to time, even though we've been doing this for over a year and a half. Got a great session today. I think this is a really important session that we're doing, all about students and about students' futures and what could be more important than that to our industry. I'll get the panel to introduce themselves shortly. For those that don't know me, I recognise most of the names who's registered. My name's Steve Assured. I'm Chief Exec of the ISE, and also full declaration, I am one of the commissioners to the Student Futures Commission. So this is a project that I've been been involved with and also very keen to stay involved with. So as with all our webinars, we will be recording this. So you'll get a copy of the recording into your inbox, and it will also go onto our webinar platform over the next couple of days. So if there's anything you want to recap, you'll be able to do it that way, but also please share it amongst your colleagues and the teams, because I think we're going to be covering some really important messages, and we're keen as ever to get those out as far as possible. So I'm conscious of time, so let's get straight into the content. We'll do some introductions first of all, and I'll go around the panel as I see them on my screen. Hilary, would you like to say hello first and just give us a quick hello and just let us know who you are?
Yes, hello everyone. It's so lovely to be here. So thank you for inviting me to be a part of this panel. My name is Hilary Gyebi-Ababio. I am the Vice President of Higher Education at the National Union of Students UK, and I'm also very privileged to be one of the commissioners on the Student Futures Commission. So really looking forward to this event, and I think there's lots to explore. So I'll leave it there and give everyone else time to introduce themselves.
Great, thanks, Hilary. Colin, you're next on my screen going clockwise. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Hello there, my name is Colin Bailey and I'm the President and Principal at Queen Mary University in London, and I'm also one of the commissioners.
That's great. And actually, it was a visit to Colin's campus that gave me the idea to do this webinar, because having seen for myself how much universities are having to do and are doing, I think there's an element whereby particularly the employers amongst us actually really understanding just quite what the pressures are on campus, I think is really important, but we'll get to that later. Mary, you're next on my screen as the Commissioner's Chair. Would you like to say hello?
Yeah, thanks very much, and thanks for having me on the webinar. I'm Mary Curnock Cook, and as Steve said, I'm chairing the Student Futures Commission, so it's lovely to see my fellow commissioners on this call. Apart from that, I've now just got a non-executive portfolio in education and particularly in higher education still.
Fantastic. And many of us in the ISE audience will know Mary, of course, because you used to lead UCAS, didn't you? And UCAS Media, one of our important members, and we do a lot of work with those as well. So, cool. Thank you, Mary. And finally, Richard, would you like to say hello just before I hand over to you to do the main to kick us off?
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you, Stephen. It's great to be here. I'm Richard Brabner, Director of the UPP Foundation, which has obviously initiated this the Student Futures Commission. I have to put my hands up and also say that I am the reason why we're 10 minutes late today due to various IT technicalities at UPP.
Fantastic, thanks. But we're here. That's the most important thing. So those of you that have taken part in our webinars before will know this. I'm going to act as host for today. If you've got any questions for the panel as we go through the content piece, please pop them into the questions box, and I will then act as MC and present those to the panel. As we go along, I'll do it as we go along, but actually we've also got some time at the end. If you are going to pop a question in, just a plea, if you can keep your question succinct, because I'm not the best at multitasking, so trying to read lots of text whilst posing a question sometimes can be a bit tricky. So, but please do. We want to have this as interactive as possible. Right, without further ado, let's get stuck straight into the content. So, Richard, can I hand over to you? I'm going to show your slides, so just let me know when you'd like me to move on.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you, Stephen. So, for those of you who don't know who we are, the UPP Foundation, we're 5 years old. We're a sort of independent corporate foundation, a charity in own right, but set up and funded by a company called University Partnerships Programme. And we have a sort of dual purpose. We're a grant-giving charity, and in our 5 years, we've sort of funded 34 projects in that time. And we do some public policy thought leadership. So focusing essentially on supporting disadvantaged students succeed at university and on the civic agenda. So Stephen, onto the slides.
2 seconds, Richard's just done. No, I'm having the technical glitches.
I should say at the start, so the first slide is why we set up the commission, and obviously as everybody will recognise, universities, staff, yourselves, of course, have worked bloody hard, tirelessly in the last 2 years in extraordinary circumstances. But I think, as we'd all recognise, COVID has been disruptive for the students in terms of their learning, living experience, community experience, well-being, and graduate opportunities. And obviously not just the disruption now, but what are the long-term consequences of that? And I suppose the motivation for setting up the commission was when the government appointed Sir Kevin Collins as the catch-up czar for schools and children. And I had a conversation with Mark Leach Wonky, who many of you will know, around, well, why isn't there any support for higher education for university students? And of course, as a charity, we had to take a sort of right or wrong approach to that. And universities are autonomous, so we have to sort of lead this ourselves. We thought there was a gap at that time. It's quite ironic because, of course, since then he's obviously resigned. But we thought there was a gap in bringing together the sort of ideas, insights, suggestions from across the community, the sector, on how we can support students in their successful futures. And I should say that we wanted this to be a positive inquiry, so there's no blame attached to what's happened over the last couple of years, as well as a constructive approach to giving proactive, pragmatic ideas for the future of the student experience. And then, so our aims of the commission, the next slide, Stephen, is threefold really, around how we can sort of ensure students are best supported from the pandemic through a collaborative effort from the sector, for practical recommendations, mainly to universities, but also to government as well, and to create ideas, insights and learnings from the whole HE community that can be disseminated as and when we go. And I suppose that the methodology has been similar to a select committee inquiry. We've held evidence sessions both in person a few weeks ago in Birmingham on employability and graduate outcomes, and virtually previously on teaching and learning and student experience, with experts coming in and giving their insights. We've held focus groups of student unions. We've had 40 submissions from universities, SUs, other sector bodies, and we did some polling at the start of the commission, and that's currently in the field for our final report. And if you go to the next slide, we published an interim report in September. So we just wanted to sort of summarise some of the key findings from that as we then go into sort of more the focus on employability and graduate outcomes. So the first one really for our interim report, and this wasn't a report really about recommendations, it was more of a summary of what we've learned so far, was that, you know, the first is about the sort of digital experience of teaching and learning and how we integrate that in terms of in-person. So we say there as a statement, if the future is digital, universities need to work out how to communicate this to students and the wider public. And I think our evidence shows that there's quite a broad consensus across the community that some form of digital learning, of course, is here to stay. We heard from one expert giving evidence that this is really turbocharged the future. And we've seen some really a good example of how this actually been positive to many students in terms of, particularly in terms of accessibility for non-traditional students, disadvantaged students, commuter students, and disabled students in particular, who have been calling for some of this for quite some time. We've also seen, and it's great to have Colin on the panel, when in our visit at Queen Mary, huge efforts that universities have done to ensure that there's a really good integration between those that are learning online and those that are learning in person, both in terms of the resources of people, but also of tech, and the priority that institutions have placed on that. And we know that, you know, Queen Mary gave us an outstanding example, but of course there'll be sort of many examples across the sector of universities really focusing on that. But I think it's fair to say that the sector has also found itself under intense pressure on this from students and in particular from the media. And for many outside HE, online learning is seen to be sort of a low value cost-cutting measure. We obviously as a commission completely reject that sort of crude analysis of what's happened over the last year, but it does mean that we sort of, those recommendations or sort of thoughts around how we better communicate, I suppose, both to students and the public to ensure that there is a greater understanding of the sort of pedagogical benefits of what we're doing in the future, to understanding the sort of framing of how we appropriately describe what we're doing, that we've got the right balance in place, and that there's constant engagement with students, as clearly this agenda is going to be evolving as we move forward. Next slide, Steve. I'm going to take that afterwards, so if I go on to the next slide as well, thank you, the belonging slide. The sort of second theme was around belonging is the new measure of student engagement. It's really came out strongly across all of our evidence sessions, whether it's about teaching and learning, the wider student experience, or employability, about the importance of belonging in terms of student and graduate success, both in terms of, if you think of it through the lens of loneliness or mental well-being, but also in particular in terms of social capital and skills that students engaging in. And there's some really interesting work that many institutions are doing in terms of embedding this within the curriculum. We've heard a lot about service learning or work-based learning to sort of encourage belonging across the student body. And of course, this is so important given the sort of decimation of extracurricular opportunities last year, inevitably as a result of the pandemic. The fact that working class students have perhaps been affected more than more traditional middle class students in this, and how participation in that wider student experience is so important to belonging. And I think it's quite clear, particularly from the evidence we've had from student unions, that this is a real top priority for the student body. The next slide, the third sort of key theme and summary of this was around student confidence, and you know, we've seen a real hit to student confidence, to be frank, in terms of academic progression. You'll see here this really quite profound quote around students telling us from the student room that they had fake grades, or they felt they might be entering university with fake grades that might damage them in the future, that they feel, and we saw this in the polling, that they were below the standard they expected to be academically. And at that time, and I think this may have changed now, so it'll be interesting from everybody's perspectives, that the confidence in the employment market was low. Now we've seen that many have also opted out of pursuing sort of graduate employment opportunities and turning instead, as we've called here, to sort of masters, to postpone their entry into what they perceive to be a really competitive recruitment market. Next slide, sorry, Stephen. And the other sort of feeding into this in terms of what we heard in terms of employability and graduate outcome session is that students are really quite aware of the changes taking place in the workplace. This is changing their perceptions and priorities. We've seen that the rise of home working across many sectors has meant that student priorities for their first graduate job has changed. Our polling saw that flexible working, job security, opportunities for training and development are all becoming more important for graduates than before the pandemic, with, interestingly, location less important. And we've heard from students in universities that alongside traditional graduate routes, students are increasingly interested in starting up their own business, taking multiple roles in portfolio careers. Now, this won't be new to anybody on the call, but I think where this links with some of the other issues is that the pandemic has exacerbated existing trends that are already out there. And, you know, we saw that in our evidence session in Birmingham, quite a concrete way that students are really increasingly interested in not just embedding workplace learning within the curriculum, but taking multiple portfolio careers and enterprise too. Our final slide to kick things off. I think one interesting, and I think this is a really pleasing sort of evidence that we've received so far, is that there's a real renewed focus on employability that we've seen. Now, we've been exploring how universities can change and adapt to ensure students access the right resources, information, skills, experiences alongside their formal learning. And we're really hearing from universities and from students themselves that this sort of delivering employability and skills for the future of work is now a must rather than a nice to have. I'm sure Mary will talk to you in a moment about some of this, but you know, there's good evidence of vice chancellors across the sector, in all parts of the sector, Russell Group and Post 92, really saying that, you know, students are coming to their institutions to get a better future, not necessarily in a crude terms of a salary or the next job, but thinking about the medium-term future. This is really, really critical. And linked to, I suppose, the slide on belonging, really interesting stuff around how we're embedding this into the curriculum, either through formally through placements or more traditional routes, or through what they call in the States service learning, community-led learning, and thinking about not just how this reaches those that are best resourced to access it, but how can we make this more universal so that it reaches all students within our sector. So anyway, really looking forward to the discussion, and that's sort of just a snapshot of what we've heard so far, and we're moving in a rapid pace to publish our final report in February, where there's going to be some crunchy recommendations.
Fantastic, thank you, Richard. Really great way to kick us off. And I've seen the draft of our own annual recruitment survey that comes out next week. And actually, I'm still putting the final touches to the numbers, but fundamentally they show that yes, a market that's recovering, but echoing actually some of the themes you talked about there. You know, the competition for jobs is actually the highest that we've seen since we started collating records. It goes back at least 20 years. That's application for vacancies. So there's a lot of what you said that comes through in our data as well. But you seamlessly teed up there, Mary, Richard. So anybody think we might have planned this beforehand? So Mary, just over to yourself. So this is where we'll switch into the more panel discussion. Again, just a quick reminder, if you've got any questions, please pop them into the dialogue box and I'll keep an eye on those and I will present those to our panelists. But Mary, perhaps if you can kick us off. And I was just thinking about when it comes to students and their career prospects, what do you think are those key themes that employers and educators that us as a sector need to concentrate on?
Yeah, thanks, Steve, and thanks, Richard, as well. Excuse me. I just don't think that we can talk honestly and authentically about transforming people's lives through higher education without acknowledging that life includes working life, and how people earn their living and enable their participation in civic society. And I think there's a bit of us in the sector. We need to stop worrying about, what's the purpose of university, because I think if the pursuit of academic scholarship isn't aligned, at least in part, with explicit development of skills that transfer well into various work contexts, then I actually think we're getting something wrong. And Richard mentioned this idea that I think there is slowly, I would sense, a change of attitude in the sector, that rather than employability and graduate outcomes being the sort of a kind of almost like a side benefit of higher education, it's becoming much more the key purpose. So we might start seeing more talk about not so much about academic outcomes, but hand in hand with graduate outcomes. Now, I think universities do need to recognise this whole kind of sense of lack of confidence amongst our students, and we've seen this through the work that we've done. They've lost confidence in their academic progress. They've lost confidence in their social and professional communication skills, and not just that they're feeling very anxious about whether they can get a job or not, but they've kind of lost confidence because, of course, they've missed out on a lot of work experience and work placements over the last couple of years while they've been locked down and working from home or schooling from home. And I think that this does, we need to, as universities need to recognise this, but also employers need to recognise it. And my sense is that renewed efforts to partnerships and collaborations between employers, local, national, large graduate intakes, smaller enterprises who might be taking on 1 or 2 graduates a year, need to partner with universities. We need help with work experience and placements, probably more than ever before. I think even though people have found the new abilities to do stuff online, careers fairs and so on, those face-to-face conversations are still incredibly important, and a student will get a lot of confidence, I think, from the ability to have an adult conversation with an employer. And also, I think, developing a narrative about what's required for success in different types of workplace that employers and students can resonate with. I think employers probably need to dial up their empathy and their patience with a cohort of students who are feeling very anxious about graduate employment. And I do have one gripe for employers, and forgive me, Stephen, if I'm upsetting any of your members and clients here, but I've heard it a million times, and even more frequently since the pandemic, about students making multiple applications and too often just not even getting an acknowledgement. And I just think, you know, it's just shameful. It's so unkind, and actually it's unprofessional, and I think it's quite easy to correct. So that's my kind of plea for employers, is please just automate so that people hear something back. And then I also think that individuals, both in universities and in employers, can do so much through mentoring, through coaching, through helping students with interview preparation and practice, actually helping them research employers and jobs. And I'd go so far as to say that this is a kind of a moral and a civic duty. And I'll stop there, Stephen, and let you go on to other guests.
Thanks, Mary. Yeah, I agree with what you said about, you know, if somebody takes the time to put an application in, I think the least they can expect is an acknowledgement. And also, we know from lots of organisations, the technology exists, particularly as more testing has moved up front, to actually give something that's back in the way of constructive feedback. So I think our employers tend to be the more structured type. They are better at this, not perfect, but they are much better. And I think, yes, I agree. I'm with you on that one. There's no excuse not to be doing that nowadays. Mary, I'm sure we'll come back to you in due course as the webinar goes on, but thanks for that introduction. Hilary, can I turn to you next? Of course, actually, you are for the closest to the student voice out of all of us, not only in experience, but also through the role that you do. And we've covered lots of things already, haven't we? We talked about, you know, just those record numbers of applications means that's a record number of applications. So it's no surprise that students are making multiple applications. We talked about particularly, I thought it was striking that Richard mentioned, you know, that idea of fake grades. When I first heard that evidence on this commission, I thought, wow, that's strong language, and is quite concerning actually that people might think that. But what, just from your perspective, what do you think are those key concerns of students relating to an employment? How do you think employers can help? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think this is a really important part of these conversations that we're having. I'm not going to say post-pandemic, but in hopefully the latter stages of what this pandemic has looked like and the impact that it's had on not only the wider higher education sector, but, you know, when we think about students and their experience of a time that has been hugely shifting and hugely changing in what they've seen people go through in university and what they're seeing now. I think there's something firstly to be said, that when we think about the direct feedback that we've heard from students about what the pandemic has sort of caused them to feel about their employment prospect, what it makes them feel about the future, I think it's important to say that what the pandemic has done in a really visceral way is sort of amplify some of the already existing concerns and anxieties that students have had for years and years. And this is something that I felt closely myself, having just graduated 2 years ago, I think, 2 years ago. And I'm seeing my peers feel the same, where you go to university and now university isn't like how sometimes people see it, where you go in to do a degree and then you get a job that has that degree name. Like, there's so many.
I think we just lost your voice, Hilary. Let me just. Yes, your voice has become disconnected. Can't hear you at the moment. Do you want to reconnect it? See if you can reconnect your voice. Yes, it's just showing as disconnected on my control panel. If I can switch to Colin, and then we'll come back to you, Hilary, if that's okay.
Is that okay? Sorry, Hilary, you were in full flow there.
No, I thought it was just me at one end. So, we'll try and get Hilary reconnect. I know she had some broadband issues earlier. So, Colin, I mentioned that actually, so we as commissioners we visited your campus. It's quite a while ago now, of course, because it was before the students came back. And I think for the first time, it really struck me just the amount of effort, time, resources, let alone cash that you've had to invest, to face up to the challenge of facing as part of the pandemic. So I just wondered if you can give us a bit more of an insight into that challenge and your concerns about student outcomes and where employers might need to engage better.
Yeah, great, thank you. Just to set the context, just in case people don't know, of course, Queen Mary University of London is a Rust Group university, research-led. We've got 90% of our students are from state school, 52% are first in their family to go to university, 70% are BAME, and 25% are from families where the taxable income is less than £10,000 a year. I'm going to push back on my fellow panelists and perhaps the Commission as a whole, because I actually disagree about employability all of a sudden becoming embedded and it was previously an add-on. That wasn't my view at all. Employability was embedded with everything we did at university. It was all about making sure that we could create and give the students the skills that they need to be adaptable in an ever-changing employment market, and whether that's in the UK and or overseas. And pre-pandemic, I was talking to a lot of companies about looking at that transition of our students into companies. I remember having a conversation with a FTSE 100 board about the issues of their recruitment, because I was saying to them, you're recruiting exactly the same people that are sitting around this board. So universities and employers have been working hand in hand, and it's something I'm really passionate about, and making sure that the employers get the best students that are on offer across the UK, but all our students have that opportunity to work in different sectors across the UK and across the globe. Thank you for what you said about all the work our staff have done here at Queen Mary. The campuses, we've got 5 campuses in London, they're all rocking, the students are back, they love the interaction, they miss that community feel. The extracurricular activities, all the students are engaged, which are so important. But if we look at the impact of the pandemic and the challenges, if I take them first from the students' point of view, I mean, during the pandemic, a number of students did not have that opportunity to build up their networks. The campus was still open all through the pandemic, and of course we can support the students, but it wasn't the same. It wasn't the same being online. It wasn't the same as trying to build up those networks, especially students that haven't got that support from their family and friends. So again, that was a real blow to a number of our students. Lack of confidence, I can see that right through the student body, but actually I can see it right through the sector. And that's something we've already discussed and something we need to address. And I'm working very hard here at the university to really lift that confidence back up amongst our student population. The issue about paid and unpaid work experience, we were working on that extremely hard pre-pandemic. About 21% of our final year students did not have paid or unpaid work experience. This year, that has increased to 28%, which is a real concern, because we were trying to push that down and make sure everyone had the opportunity to get work experience. Obviously, 21% in 2019 was too high, but the pandemic has sent it the other way now. And that's different across subjects. So if you take English and drama, for example, 17% of our students didn't have paid or unpaid work experience. That's increased to 32% in 2001. So again, those numbers we really do need to work at. The issue with students engaging with employers, my biggest concern at the moment is virtual fatigue. I think we haven't got that balance right. So when Obviously, universities, we work hand in hand with our students to make sure we get the balance right from an academic point of view. We've got mixed mode education where students can be on campus and sitting in the lecture, and if they can't make it onto campus, they can follow the lecture online. But it's very important you get that balance right. I think at the moment, employers are engaging a lot with students virtually, and I think there's signs of students starting to disengage. If I think about employers more generally, what I would urge all employers to do is keep on talking to us as universities. It is a partnership. We're going into new ways of working. And one of the things that I think we need to consider is I'll ask everyone to remember their first job, when they first turned up for work on that first day. At the moment, we've got some employers are saying your first day is virtual. Just think how you would feel if you were joining a company, because you're joining a company and we talk about diversity and inclusion, and we're starting to tackle the diversity bit, but the inclusion, you want to feel a part of the culture and a part of the company. Now, of course, if that's online and there's only 2 days in the office, that is a real issue. So again, you know, how can we work in partnership to prepare our students for that, for what they would expect when they're starting to work? And also, we constantly talk to employers about the skills that they expect. Now, of course, the skills need to be adaptable because the employment market will change. Companies change every 6 months, typically. You know, that problem solving I talked about, but making sure that the students that we're producing, the graduates we're producing, do have the skills that companies are looking for. And what I would urge is that inclusion. Just think about the lack of confidence as we've gone through the pandemic, and making sure that graduates, when they start with you, feel included. The other thing that is a great help, and a number of employers do it, of course, is releasing the alumni. So, you know, our alumni working with us at Queen Mary, but other university, it is a great help, great role models to our students, either coming in and talking face-to-face to our students or online, but also mentoring is incredibly important. And the other thing I would say is about diversity and diversity in thought, and looking at your workforce as employers. Be very careful how you engage with the students. Students engage more when they can relate to people that they're talking to. So again, I think that is incredibly important. So I'll run through very quickly some of the challenges that the students are telling me that they're facing, some of the challenges and of course employers are facing. But overall, what we've got to do going forward is to continue to work in partnership, discuss with each other what is best for employers, what is best for students. We're not going to get this right first time, but we've got to get that balance right, especially between virtual and face-to-face. Students are telling us now that they're missing that face-to-face career fairs, that interaction and that community feel that they're missing. But working in partnership, we can get this balance right as we go forward.
Just down to great, thanks, Colin. That's really good. Just out of because for some of our audience, again, like I said, particularly those employers, they won't have been on campus, you know, for nearly 2 years. I wonder if you can just paint a little bit of picture about what campus life is like at Queen Mary. Have you got students? Is it because I came before term started, so naturally the campus was empty. But I wonder, is it a vibrant space now? Have you got people moving around?
Oh, it's rocking. It's absolutely rocking. I mean, the students are loving it. You would not notice any difference to if you come on campus pre-pandemic. You know, we're watching our cases very closely, but the students are engaged in all the societies, all the sport. You walk across our campus and you wouldn't notice any difference. And again, in our lecture theatres, very busy. Obviously, we haven't got social distancing. As I say, we're watching those cases, all COVID secure in a sense of ventilation, but you wouldn't notice any difference. So the students are loving it. All of a sudden, we're back as a community. We're supporting each other, which is incredibly important.
which is great to hear. Smashing. Thanks, Colin. I've got some couple of questions coming through, which I'll pose in a minute. Hillary's back on the screen. I've got my fingers crossed that we can hear you, Hillary. Sorry, we interrupted you mid flow. Can you remember where we were up to? I'm trying to remember that now.
Yes, I think so. Sorry, my laptop froze and then I dialed in, so hopefully you can hear me. And though I don't know if the screen will match my voice, but
I can hear you.
Yes. Yes. So where was I? I think I was talking about how it's really interesting that when we think about what students have been talking about, in terms of how they're feeling about employment and how they feel about their next steps. You know, the pandemic didn't just sort of like out of the blue make students feel like this. This has been something that has been ongoing. And so, if anything, the pandemic amplified those already existing feelings of anxiety and worry about what the future looks like. And I think this is partly because, you know, now the student journey from education to employment looks really, really different. You know, students don't all come to university and do the degree that they end up having a career in. And I think there's a really important relationship in that I think employers need to take on and understand that students aren't just going for the discipline, they're going to also collect the whole part of the student experience that gives them the different skills and experiences that enable them to be adaptable and flexible in different workplaces and in different careers. I think it's also important to highlight that when we think about employability and when we think about what the pandemic has really highlighted for us to think about going forward, I think for universities there's a big lesson to be learned about how do we, from the get-go, ensure that we're giving students a holistic experience and equipping them holistically for what it will look like to take their next steps in the future. And that means not only skills, but also how do we build up that social and cultural capital in students for them to be able to feel confident in the wider world, where some of the things that they get in a really specific way from universities aren't talked about or aren't practiced as widely. You know, I've often said it to the commission that I went to university and I was told that I was part of a group that was widening participation. But when you go out into the wider world, that term doesn't really exist. You don't go into a workplace and hear widening participation. And so it's really important that on the part of universities, they're really instrumental in equipping students holistically. But I think employers have a big sort of transition to make in understanding the different ways that students will now engage with the employment market, and that goes from application. First of all, students don't apply in all the same ways anymore, and sometimes don't connect with applications in the same ways. Students have found so many different ways of displaying their skills and talents and education other than their CVs can show. But also in terms of what Mary was saying about empathy, I think students want to be in workplaces where they can connect with the people that they're working with and actively feel that the work they're doing is actively allowing them to become passionate about things and actually dig deep into the work and feel that they're doing meaningful work. And so there's something really important about employers adapting their practices and adapting their workplaces to actually meet the different needs, skills, interests, passions that students are now bringing to the table in a world that is increasingly growing and evolving. I know that we want to have time for questions, so I'll say one more point and then I will open it up for whatever questions there might be. But I think the last point that needs to be taken is that now we need to recognize that flexibility and agency is probably one of the biggest factors that students think about when it comes to the employment market. And I think this is very important because I think it was on Richard's slides actually that students aren't necessarily one career people anymore. I think now we're seeing students and graduates now move into a place where they're having multiple careers. They're going into one sector and changing into others and actually taking the skills and the learnings that they get from each part of those careers into what they eventually go on to build a life around. And so it's so important that we don't discount the importance of continued learning in this space, you know, thinking about lifelong learning. How do we continue to ensure adult learning is something we invest in? And how do employers and universities continue to work together in order to make sure that we are still investing in education way past that traditional form of educating people at universities and formal institutions? And so I think that's a real partnership challenge, I think, for employers to really connect with universities to move forward in thinking about how do we continue to develop our workforce and make our workforce more diverse, more inclusive, and broad in what we are continuing to innovate in and develop in as employers and society. So yeah, I'll leave it there because I think the other panelists, from what I heard, covered it really excellently. So another question. So I'm gonna get back to you, Stephen, for questions.
Great, thanks, Hilary. We've got some questions coming through, so we've got a few minutes left. So again, if you've got any questions, pop them into the chat box. So the first question I've got, and I think I'll come to everybody on this, but I'll come to you first, Hilary, actually, because like I said, I think you could well be the closest to it. And the question is from Vicky, and she's asking, how can we support students to gain and build their confidence? So going back to this thought around confidence might be low, fake grades, and I'm also very conscious of the students who maybe don't have those support groups that some other students may have. You know, they may not understand as much about the job markets. So is there anything you think that that, you know, whether it's employers or whoever, can really kind of focus on, or what the nub of the issue when it comes to this student confidence piece?
This is so interesting, and actually in some of our oral evidence sessions there were some really good bits and pieces that I was hearing from employers and universities around what it looks like to build student confidence. And I think first of all, student confidence isn't built just when they sort of are in the applying part of their application part rather of their journey, or when they're in their job. I think we need to think about what does it look like to build confidence in students whilst they're in that learning process and figuring out what they want to do going forward. And I think there's something really important about getting to know students and building relationships with students from the get-go when they start at universities to when they are actively looking to start new roles and start new jobs following their degree. And I think there's something important about when I speak about investing in students, it's not only about like sort of putting money in schemes that would continue to help them to skill up and learn more about the workplace, but it's about getting to know them as people and understanding what their changing needs are. And so I think first of all, it's about, you know, looking at students and getting to know them about their university and educational journey. I think it's also investing in programs and schemes that build their confidence of what the workplace looks like and how they can sort of bring themselves to the workplace and actively fit into a space where they are bringing their individuality, creativity, imagination, and innovation. And then finally, and I think this is a big challenge for employers, I think there's something about having flexibility within your workplaces for students to come and be leaders in that space. And I say that because, you know, students aren't sort of passive absorbers of environment and education and knowledge. They actually are a part of building these things. And so making sure that your workplaces have the flexibility and agency for students to be able to shape what the future of those sectors look like and be active leaders when they are graduates and then employees in certain sectors is such a big deal for students being able to feel confident in going into a workplace knowing that they have the agency to build and adapt those workplaces into something that they can champion and continue to be confident in the future. So those are my tips to keep it brief.
Great, thanks, Hilary. Mary, would you like to come in on that particular question? Is there anything that strikes you around that student confidence piece and what we can do?
Yeah, I mentioned in my earlier remarks that I think being able to kind of buddy up with somebody who's already in the workplace as a kind of mentor or as a coach. I'm sure, like other people on the panel, I'm, you know, probably, I don't know, a dozen times a year, I end up helping a young person with a first or a second job, helping them about how to research a company they're going to apply for, how to prepare for an interview, what sort of questions to prepare for, and so on. So people who've been doing this for a while need that kind of help. And, you know, just you know, that point about imagine yourself going into your first job and it being online and so on. Just imagine yourself going for your first rounds of interviews when you've just never done it before. You don't know what it's going to be like. And I think helping young people to understand that actually going for a few interviews, you know, don't necessarily have I've got to get this job in mind. Getting a bit of practice, you know, I've seen it happen so many times that people who've done 2 or 3 interviews, they kind of get into the swing of it, they understand how the process works, and, you know, maybe after 2 or 3 goes at it that they start to build their confidence and actually do a really strong application and an interview for a particular job. So I think all of us, you know, whether we work in universities or anywhere else, you know, if there's a way of reaching out and just being available to hold a hand on an individual basis, I think that's probably one of the #1 things. Now, I know universities have got their own services, you know, CV clinics and, you know, how to prepare for assessments and so on. But I still feel like if anyone could have a one-to-one buddy, it would be the best tonic.
Yes, that's a great point. There's a 1 hour project that we're supporting that is all about that, actually people just giving up an hour to mentor individuals. And I think there's lots of other initiatives like that that are great. Colin, is there anything that you'd add from your perspective to that?
Just to emphasise, the mentoring is incredibly important, and others have covered that. Role models is another important one. Hilary, I went through the widening participation. Sheffield allowed me through their widening participation. I left school at 16. For students to see that actually they can relate to someone and say, well, I can do that. It's just has so much impact and raises everyone's confidence. The students being back on campus, engaging with each other again has increased that confidence. But the thing about transition, and we've already covered it, transition into the workplace is so important. Please, if you've got people starting, whether they're graduates or someone else, and their first couple of days are online, just be aware of that, because I think that isn't a great start to your working life, if you like, or working with your companies.
Definitely. I think I'll squeeze. We've got a couple of minutes. I'll squeeze in just one question that's come from Rowena. And Rowena, it's an idea and a question sort of wrapped into one. And she's talking about this bringing together academic skills development, personal development, careers management, and putting it under this umbrella of professional development. And I think it's something that we have talked about as part of this, but I guess it's that integrating all this place, because Serena's talking about just the competition for students' time and the pressure students face with all these things in these different buckets. I wonder if anybody's got some quick thoughts and actually if there's more that we can do with that, and is there something that perhaps employers might be able to help with that as well? May I saw you nod. Do you want to go first?
No, I'm happy to. I think so we've heard some really interesting evidence on the Commission about people kind of thinking more about co-curricular content rather than just extracurricular. I think the idea, you know, a lot of universities help students to volunteer in the community and so on. I think the idea of service learning is a really interesting concept. So yeah, I think that idea of professional development, it's happening all the time. Sometimes I don't think we call it out well enough, and we don't help students themselves to see when they've actually had some valuable learning. I chair the governing body of the Dyson Institute, and in effect the head of the student union there. It's not a student union, you know. And the first time he presented to us, I said, you know, what have you learned all in this? And it just hadn't occurred to him that he was getting personal and professional development by leading the student body. So I think we do need to help with calling out what's actually happening quite often under people's noses.
Yes, that's something I hear time and time again. Sorry, yeah, carry on, Colin.
Just to add, I mean, without going into detail, we have 5 pillars on our teaching and learning, and one of those picks up things like volunteering, work experience, all what we used to call the extracurricular activities, and we're making sure working and co-creating these with students and the student body, making sure that these are captured. I'm really supportive of the here. I know a lot of universities aren't, but actually I think it's a good framework for students to capture everything that they're doing. From employers, I would urge you just to keep on working with universities, things like undergraduate projects, for example, working hand in hand, and employers helping with those are so important. And what we found during the pandemic is our current partnerships have worked very well, but actually building new partnerships or employers coming forward and offering their help did actually start to go down during the pandemic. We're hoping that will come back up, but incredibly important, because of course employers can look at our students, and students can look at you as well as employers.
Great, thanks, Colin. Richard, from a, I don't know, from a personal perspective or a commission perspective, is this something you think the commission will be looking at, or do you have any thoughts that you'd like to add?
Yeah, certainly, think that this is obviously a key topic for the commission, and I think it's, what's interesting to me is how all these things tie together. We're talking about belonging, the key for relationships and participation in terms of the previous question around rebuilding confidence, and then how that integrates into sort of social capital and supporting students thrive as they become graduates into the world of work. I suppose my message for employers would be the underlying behind all of this is uncertainty for students, and anything they can do to create more transparency in terms of their processes, in terms of their practices, both as applicants and as when they start to employers, I think would be hugely welcome. Second message is innovation. We talk a lot about how universities are innovating around embedding stuff in their curriculum around shorter placements to ensure that different types of organisations can do it. I wonder if there needs to be more innovation from the other side around organisations, employers, to create an opportunities for young people in terms of portfolio careers. And then for institutions, just building on, I think, what Colin was talking about, the vital element of the community and how important those sort of both formal and informal ways of building relationships is so critical to students rebuilding their confidence.
Thanks, Richard. And then Hilary, if I can just come to you to a final word or two just to wrap us up. Any thoughts from yourselves? Because I guess you do, again, see it from that real front end of the students who have all these competing demands. Anything that you think that we can do to bring all this together a bit better?
Yeah, I think, what would I say? I want to keep it as succinct as possible, but I think, first of all, transparency, like what's been said, has been really important. Let students know what your processes are, let them know what you have in place and the opportunities for support that there are available. I would say also continue to collaborate. When we see employers working with universities to be available to students and provide opportunity to students, that's where students often benefit, because there is that link with somewhere where they already feel familiar and have people supporting them. And then the final thing that I would say is just be prepared to do things differently, to meet students that think differently and work differently and approach the world differently, and having that type of adaptability will ensure that you will continue to get different types of students with different interests, with so many different things to bring. And I think that's going to be really important for employers to keep an eye out on, as students and the world inevitably continue to change and grow and think and work differently.
Great, thanks, Hilary. Mary, what's next for the Commission? What should we all be looking out for? What's next up to go public?
So we've started working on our final report. We've got, as Richard said, our final polling is out in the field at the moment. So we'll bring, that's designed to kind of test our findings over the last 5 or 6 months and start to pull together the final report, which I think we'll be publishing early in the new year.
Fantastic. And we'll make sure that we're pushing that as well through our channels. Thank you very much, folks. We've run slightly over the hour, so we'll call it time there. I'm sure everybody else has got Zoom calls and things they need to be jumping onto. Thanks for bearing with us with some of our technical glitches. It's had a few more than usual today, so thank you for bearing with us. And thank you very much to our panelists. Thank you, Mary. Thank you, Colin. Thank you, Richard. And thank you, Hilary. I know how busy you all are, so giving up your time to do this is very much appreciated. I have to say to our panelists, one thing, our platform is quite rude. When I hit the stop button, it cuts everybody off, so we don't all go back to a green room where I can say thank you very much. So take the thanks from me and from our audience now. As I said at the start, this has been recorded. You will get a link to the recording, so please recap over anything that you think you've missed, but also share it amongst your colleagues. I know we get a very high take up of the recordings when we put it on our platform, so more than happy for you to share that. So on that, I will finish it. Thank you all very much. Thank you for your time, and hopefully talk to you all soon, and maybe see you all in person again soon. Thank you very much.